As a business owner, we hear people say all the time, that time is your most valuable asset. And I kind of agree with that, but I really think our most valuable asset is welcome to this episode of the Business Brains and BS podcast. Today, we're going to talk about something that is a touchy subject for a lot of business owners, and it's time and how we use our time. We were just joking around. Greg and I were just joking around about, have you ever tried to smash everything, a week's worth of stuff, into one Saturday morning as a business owner because you haven't had the time to get everything else done? So Greg, let's jump right into it. So as a business owner, we hear people say all the time, that time is your most valuable asset. And I kind of agree with that, but I really think our most valuable asset is how we use our time, right? So as a business owner, who has a growing, thriving business, what are some of the struggles that you've had with time?
Well, for me, a lot of times it's just so many things to do and that all feel important, whether that's business stuff, I've got to take care of this, and this, as well as personal stuff, like I got to take care of myself, family role obligations, I need to spend time with them, quality time, not just being present, which means I have to feel good, and so it's like all these things that I need to do, and then sit down and look at the calendar and, man, that does not seem possible.
Yeah, well, I love that you're talking about the calendar because that's one of the things that I see with business owners is that they don't do a good job of blocking time for the things that matter, right? And when we don't control our time and we let other people and other activities control our time. And as you were talking, you made me think of the Eisenhower matrix. And for anybody who's not familiar with that, I think 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I think it's number 3 is put first things first. And he talks about the Eisenhower matrix, and it's really all about identifying what you're going to do based on four quadrants. And there are 2 filters that are used, and it's urgent or not urgent, and important and not important. And in the not urgent, not important quadrant, that's where I tend to see a lot of people start to fall. And that tends to be things like getting stuck scrolling through email or, YouTube, watching cat videos or whatever it might be. And then kind of raising your head up and seeing that you just wasted an hour and a half scrolling through TikTok videos or whatever it is. And I say that that's a place I see people getting hung up. That's probably more in my personal life. In a business life, the place where I tend to see people get hung up is on the urgent, not important square. So for those of you who don't know what that is, that's where something seems urgent, but it's really not important. And what we tend to find there is that other people tend to be involved in that. So, Greg, you got any good examples for us of things that you've seen happen to people in kind of that urgent but not important square?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And like you said, a lot of times those are external pressures. Like it seems important because someone else is making a big deal about it. Um, and so that's a thing. Like in my field, we talk a lot about boundaries, having, part of having healthy relationships, having healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
And so to me, this ties right into that. Hey, I care about you. I care about your performance. This is not a big deal to me, maybe don't say it quite that bluntly, but figuring out a way to communicate that. You know, One of the things I've found is a lot of times people can figure it out for themselves if you let them. So I had this experience with the previous employer where I was managing 2 different like outpatient clinics, and I started at one, and that particular clinic had a long-standing history of active, involved managers. It had been an important clinic for the company for years. So they were used to being managed, right? And they would come to me with a lot of things. I constantly have people at my door. Then I started managing a second clinic, and that clinic had a lot of inconsistency with management, a lot of turnover in the managerial role. And when took over managing that clinic, they were so much more self-sufficient. It was a stark
Mhm.
contrast. And when I went there, I expected that place to be a hot mess in terms of like no one's going to be doing what they need to do because they haven't had consistent management, consistent leadership. And it turned out to be the opposite because they hadn't had someone there telling them what to do all the time. They had to figure out a lot of things themselves. And so there was a lot that was just humming right along. And it was great, like a lot easier to manage, and that taught me an important lesson. Like if you let people figure things out, a lot of times they will. Now you still want to maintain some oversight. You want to make sure that what they figure out for themselves is what is going to work well. But it taught me that lesson. Like, I don't have to do every little thing for them or tell them every little thing to do. They'll figure it out. And so back to that, like, that urgent, but not important. When somebody comes, usually for me, it's like an email or a voicemail or something. I listen to it or I read it. And if it doesn't seem that important to me, don't tell my staff this, but a lot of times I'll sit on it for a day or two and see what happens.
Yep.
Um, And a
And
lot of times it gets taken care of, you know?
well, and I think you bring up an interesting point because especially for business owners, a lot of times it seems like they have this need to be needed, if that makes any sense. And it may be something in their, who they are, that they want to be the problem solver, right? They want to be the hero. Or it may be that they haven't taken the time to create the systems and the processes and do the training to help their people, you know, be able to fend for themselves. I've actually got a client I'm working with right now, and they are, the client is the choke point. It's anytime anybody has a question, they come to the owner and say, "Hey, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do?" And one of the things I like to have business owners do if they find themselves in that situation is to use a tactic. It's called one question, two answers. So if you come to me with a question, you also need to come to me with two ways that you think that it can be addressed or solved, right? And that does a lot of really cool things for you. Number one, it makes them think, okay, is this really something that I need to stop and bug the boss with? Number two, it gets them to start thinking for themselves. Number three, it starts to give them a little bit of autonomy, right? Because they're able to say, all right, I got this. I can own this situation. Number four, it gives you some insight into their decision making process. So now you got an idea of, how good is this person at, creative thinking or at problem solving. And then number five, it gives you the opportunity to coach and train them, right? And I would say even a number six here, I'm just making these up as I go along, is that it helps you identify training opportunities for the rest of your staff. But by doing that, it's going to allow you to start to free up your time and put more onus on the people who work for you, which then allows you to spend more time focusing on the business. Because yeah, I like what you're saying there as far as, figure it out for yourself. And some people are able to do that, but in a lot of cases, they are going to need some type of training, some type of coaching system process, and then the accountability there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I realized over the course of that experience was a lot of what people were coming to me for, the information was there, and so I started doing that. I started my needier clinic. I would say, you can find this information. It's right here, and show them where it's at. It was something that had already been made available to them. But when people get used to, well, why would I go look it up in a manual or on a directory or something like that when I can just go ask Greg and he'll give me the answer? And so that's why I started telling me, like, the only reason I know the answer is because I consulted this thing right here that you also have access to. So yeah, back to the systems and everything. You can find, this recently we're working on the policy and procedure side of things and, putting together, the latest, greatest policy and procedure manual. And that's part of the reason for that.
She's a beaut, Clark.
Thanks. um, but that's part of the reason for that, is giving people a tool where they can find answers, for some of those questions. So, yeah, you don't just let them flounder, you wanna give them the resources where they can find the answers for themselves.
Yeah, it's funny as you were talking about that, it made me think about when my son was younger and he wasn't tying his shoes, and my wife kept tying his shoes for him, and I'm like, "Son, you gotta learn to tie your shoes." He's like, "Well, why? Mom does it for me all the time." And I said, "Because your mother cannot go off to college with you to make sure that your shoes are tied every day before you go to class," right? And I remember dropping him off for his first day of college and making a joke about the fact that, "Thank goodness we don't have to leave your mom here to tie your shoes for you."
Yeah, absolutely.
So, so a lot of people do get stuck in that urgent but not important, and as you're saying, it tends to be other people are involved, right? So it's the phone, it's email, it's text messages. And one of the things that I learned that I implemented, and when I did it, it makes a huge difference is when I'm well, pretty much all the time, I keep my phone on do not disturb and I've turned off notifications. So I've got a notification screen so I can swipe up on my iPhone and see all of the text messages, WhatsApp, emails, all of that I have set up. But I do that when I decide to do it instead of having the little buzz or ding every time I get a text message, a voicemail, whatever it is. And maybe you could speak to that a little bit, Greg, as far as because some of the stuff that I've read and heard is that kind of like almost a dopamine hit of, hey, it could be something fun, it could be something excited, and it pulls me away from being in focus and flow and into that. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah, we can definitely condition ourselves for that sort of thing. It goes back to, a couple episodes ago, I talked a little bit about the limbic system and that kind of fight or flight, but that's part of that system as well as, this idea that, like you said, it could be something good, something I want. It could be something bad that I'm like, oh no, what's happening? Either way, the more I continually respond to that, the more conditioned I'm going to become that this is what I have to do. And it's just the longer you do it, the harder the habit is going to be to break. So absolutely, that gets reinforced over time for sure. And I love what you said about the notifications. I think just thinking strictly from just a person's mental health standpoint, that constant like ding 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 check is not good. It's not good for us. Being able to focus on like the here and now and what actually matters is so much better for us. And so I obviously, if you're a business owner or you're working in any kind of business, so you have to check them some, but you definitely don't want to be a slave to the notifications. That's for sure.
So, and you're talking about focus when somebody's kind of in the zone and they get pulled out of it. Do you by any chance off the top of your head know how long it takes somebody to get back into that flow?
I don't know a set time frame or anything, but it just takes kind of a reset, to get out of that immediate like, what's happening, what's going on, into that like, the focus takes us a sense of calm. Not that you're like not calm in like a I'm chilled out, nothing matters, but calm in a like I can kind of be relaxed and just zone in on this thing. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
locked in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we gotta switch gears from immediate do this to relax, focus.
Well, and I think something else too is you think about it as a business owner and leader, especially somebody like you who has multiple employees. When one person whether it's the owner or somebody else in the organization is getting pulled into that type of stuff, if the phone's dinging, buzzing, vibrate, that has an impact on the people sitting around them too, right? So not only is it impacting the performance of that one individual, it's impacting the performance of everybody around them as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if I'm not doing the big things I need to do because I'm constantly in that, unimportant stage, or I'm living in my email inbox, then yeah, obviously that's going to start to affect everybody, whether it's directly in that, it's something that's annoying them in the moment, or it's indirectly in that the business just isn't performing as well. They're not getting enough clients. They're not getting paid what they want to get paid, those sorts of things. So yeah, it definitely has a big effect.
Well, and I think the annoying thing too, right? We all have our pet peeves and, people who have their keyboard turned on. So every time they send a text message, it goes, I'm trying to do something and I'm hearing that in the background. It's like, well, you just turned that off. Right. So I
Yeah.
think, I think there's a lot to be said for that. But the important thing here, again, when we fall into that urgent but not important, is recognizing that that is something that really doesn't matter pulling us away, and we need to be using our time effectively, our calendar effectively. I've got clients that have actually implemented protected time during the day, and that protected time is sacred for everybody. And during that time, you're not supposed to be, talking to anybody else. You're focusing on, what I think it was Eat That Frog talks about your MIT, right? Your most important task, or your frog. And that's what that time is set aside for. And then the leaders will have soft time in their schedule where the people who report to them can come to them with things that they need some help on, right? So it's make a list of the things you need versus, oh, I got to find out an answer to this right now. And it's not an urgent or important thing, which is the next quadrant we'll move into. I just want to clear this off my plate. So I'm going to go interrupt, the person who has the answer, pull them out of their flow so I can get an answer to something that really could have waited until this afternoon, tomorrow morning, or even Friday.
Right, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up the calendar and like that idea of protected time. Like I said earlier, it's our business stuff, but it's also the rest of our life as well. I remember one time I had this therapist that I was supervising, and she had gotten on my calendar and was looking on my calendar, and she saw that I had a family thing blocked off on my calendar, like family time blocked. And she looked at it and she was like, "You schedule family time?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she thought that sounded terrible because it wasn't like, I don't know, impulsive, or like I wasn't doing it because I woke up one day and was like, I want to go to the park with my kid, or so, whatever it was. Um, so it struck her as like really impersonal, and like I was treating them like anybody else. But no, what I explained to her was like, no, 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 no. That makes it even more special because if I don't put it on the calendar, I might forget to do it. By putting that time on the calendar, because it was a reoccurring thing. It was like this block of time every week I'm doing this. By putting that on the calendar, I make sure it happens every single time. So it's not me trying to just treat my family like a to-do on my to-do list. It's me
Right.
ensuring I have quality time with my family, which, not to get ahead of ourselves here, but that's, the one of the most important things. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, the
Yeah.
calendar is
Well,
crucial.
and I love what you're saying there. Yeah, the calendar is your tool to prioritize,
Mm.
to put the things that are important in front of you and hold you accountable to doing those things. And I was having this conversation with a client the other day about, you need to take your time with yourself on your calendar seriously. You need to look at that as an appointment with your most important client, or the biggest potential customer that you could have,
Mhm.
right? Because if you had time blocked with a potential buyer, let's say for your business at 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, you're not going to blow that off and go get ice cream or something like that. You're going to take that seriously, and when we schedule time with ourselves, we need to treat that as almost sacred, right? And that moves us into the next quadrant in the Eisenhower matrix, which is how we should be spending our time, is focusing on the stuff that's more important, right? So we have the urgent and important, which tends to be the things I refer to as keeping the business running, making sure that people get paid on time, the electric bill is paid, things along those lines. But it's funny because I was talking with my coach a while back about this very topic, and he said, you got to think of this more like a target, right? And the center part of the target is important but not urgent, and that goes to the stuff that Greg's talking about, right? Time with family, learning, working on your business, all of those things. And he said, but if you can really focus on the things that are important and really spend your time on those, the working on the business, the building the systems, the hiring processes, all of those things, then you shouldn't really have to spend as much time on the outside of that, right? Because if you take care of it while it's important but not urgent, then it doesn't get a chance to transition over to the urgent and important. And I can remember when I was with Pfizer, I would tell my reps all the time, this is a juggling act, and you've got crystal ball and you've got rubber balls. It's okay to let the rubber balls bounce. You just got to know what corner they rolled into, because they have a magic way of changing from a rubber ball into a crystal ball, right? So we've got to be really, really focused on what are the important things that are going to move us forward, that are going to help our business, and that are going to help us have the lives that we want to live too, right? So I love hearing that you're using your calendar to dedicate and dictate and direct where your time's spent. So are there other things that you're doing as a business owner to make sure that you're focusing your time on, those important things, those urgent and important things, besides using the calendar?
This goes along with using the calendar, and this method I'm about to describe, I started using after reading the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The first time I read that book, I was in graduate school. My life was extremely busy at the time. I was trying to balance multiple things. And so I decided to give it a shot after I read that chapter that you're talking about, And so the way I laid it out, like I started with identifying priorities. So I would make a list of like everything I could think of that I needed to do in that set time period, and then I'd rank them. So the most important things, number 1, number 2, number 3, and then when I start putting things on my calendar, and I still use this approach to this day. When I start putting things on my calendar, I start with number 1, and just move from there. And that way, if I don't get to something, which almost always happens, it's something that's lower on the list that wasn't as important. So family time is going to get a high rank. Things I need to do for my own health and well-being should be getting a high rank. I won't lie and say I've been perfect my whole life and always prioritize that, but I'm trying to do it more these days. You know, um, and then when it comes to business, you mentioned like payroll. If it's a week where it's a payday, well, I better make sure payroll gets run, or I'm gonna have a lot of problems. I'm gonna have a lot of unhappy therapists and support staff on my team. So that gets really important. And then the other things, that are further down the list, well, we'll try to get to them, but if we don't, we'll be okay. Like you said, the rubber ball rolling into the corner, we can pick it up and try it next week or whatever. But yeah, that like prioritizing.
Right. Yeah, and I love what you just said about payroll, right? Because that's a perfect example of something that's important but not urgent until it becomes important and urgent, right? So if you take care of payroll on Wednesday, then you don't have to worry about it. But if you're sending it in the day that it's due, right, and the payroll provider you use closes at 4 o'clock on Thursdays or whatever, and it's 3:55, and you're frantically trying to put it all together, right? That just became urgent and important. But by blocking the time, by recognizing the importance, and by getting it done before it gets to that stress point, that is really what I'm talking about as far as staying in the center of that target. So that's awesome. Um, a couple of things that I'll have business owners do, and this goes a little bit back to some of the things that we've talked about in previous episodes, is identify the things, the $12 an hour work that you're doing that you shouldn't be doing, right?
Yeah.
What are the things that you should be handing off to people? And you talked about a column, 3 different columns, right? What are things anybody can do? What are things that counselors can do? And what are things that only I should do? And another tool you can use is to basically draw out a matrix that is skill, so low skill, high skill, and then fun, right? So this is low fun for me. This is high fun for me. And then start plotting everything that you do on there, right? So bookkeeping, it's medium skill, and it's something I hate, right? So it would go into that quadrant. Then you can look at those quadrants and say, okay, what are the things that I don't like doing that are low skill or medium skill that I can now outsource to somebody else, which is going to free up my time to be able to come back and focus and work on those, those urgent things, or those important things, or those important and urgent things. Ultimately, with the goal of not having to work all the time, right?
Mhm.
Because that's what we tend to see with a lot of business owners is they get stuck working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And when they start to put some of these things in place, they can find that they don't have to work as much. My coach, Steve Leach, was telling me a story. He was working on Saturdays, working, burning the midnight oil. and he went and got himself a timer, right? Like an electrical timer, and set it Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. And he plugged all of his computer stuff into it, and then he pushed his desk back up against the wall and bolted it to the ground. So when he plugged, when he was on his computer on Friday afternoon, hit it 5 o'clock, and that thing shut off, right? And he said it was amazing knowing that I had those constraints on my time, how much more I got done and how much less time and how much more free time I had.
Yeah. That's I haven't taken it to that extreme, but that's a pretty interesting story. And, it's just one thing I think about a lot in my own life, and I talk to clients about, is pay attention to how you feel. It sounds so simple, but if something you've got going on in your life gives you a bad feeling, like lots of stress, lots of anxiety, pit in your stomach, you start hyperventilating, whatever, that's a warning sign. Maybe it doesn't mean you don't do that thing, but there's something going on there that you need to pay attention to. And so thinking about time management from that perspective, like if what I'm doing is making me feel awful, whether that's run down physically, whether I'm just stressed to the max all the time, that's my body trying to tell me something, you know? And I was talking to a buddy of mine a couple months ago who owns a business, and the business is, I mean, they've made a lot of strides, and so, doing a lot of good things. But he was telling me, he said, the only time I get for me is when I'm sitting on the toilet scrolling my phone. And I believe him because I see what's going on in the business. But when he said that to me, I was like, dude, that sucks. Like to live life that
Yeah.
way. And at some point you got to ask yourself, is the juice worth the squeeze? And that's a hard question to answer.
Well, and that's a great point because so often what tends to end up happening is we start a business and we basically buy ourselves a job, right? And for those of you who don't know what job stands for, it's just over broke. All right. So we end up in the middle of this business being the kind of the choke point in it. And we have no time. We don't have the time that we thought we were going to have when we started, and we end up getting burnout, right? Because it's like, is this really worth it? I'm so tired of having to answer everybody's questions, of being the one who puts out the fires, of having to be the rainmaker, of having to come in and fix things because it's not getting done right. Why am I still doing this? Why don't I just sell off the assets of the business, go get a job with somebody else, and at least I'll get my weekends off again and get 2 weeks of paid vacation, right? And that happens a lot with business owners because they don't take the time to prioritize and figure out what are the important things that they need to be looking at that's gonna move them forward.
For me, one thing that helps is remembering why you went into business for yourself to begin with. Because the last company I was with, I was working a lot, and it was one of those situations where I felt like I could just work 24/7 and never be caught up. And the thought I had that inspired me to go this route, I remember I was sitting in my office and I thought, if I'm going to work this hard, it should at least be for me and not somebody else, you know? But then part of that too was like, but I don't want that. I don't want to work every weekend, which starting out, yeah, I get it. People do what they got to do. I worked every Saturday for the first 2 or 3 years that I was in business, um, and sometimes still do. But I remember thinking that like early on, like if I can't make time to get a workout in, or if I can't make time to have a date night with my wife, like what was the point of this?
Nobody on their deathbed says, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. But we don't always act that way, right? And that goes back to making sure that we are prioritizing that important but not urgent time. Because you just mentioned going to the gym. Is that urgent right now? No, but in 20, 30 years, right, when I'm a crickety old 80-plus-year-old man, I'm going to be really, really glad that I did squats when I was 55,
Mhm.
right? When, uh, when you spend time with your family, with your kids, with your grandkids, that's all building those relationships, right? Building those memories that they'll be able to have forever. So, yeah, I think it's so important to make sure that we are focusing on priorities, the things that are priorities, the things that are important, And one of the things that you talked about, which I loved, is the list that you're making, right? And I've heard it said, a to-do list is where things go to die. So taking that to-do list and then taking the time to put it on your calendar. And as I've learned more and more about time management, one of the strategies that I read about is called the Ivy Lee method. And Ivy Lee was a productivity consultant back in the I don't even remember the time frame. Anyway, but he went to Charles Schwab, called him in and said, "Hey, I want my company to be more productive. What should we do?" And Ivy Lee went in and sat down with each of his executives and said, "Make a list of the top 6 things that you need to get done today. The 6 things that will move your business, your position, move what you're responsible for forward. Then do that at the end of the day. And then the next day, come in and start working on number 1 and work on that until it's done. Then move on to 2, 3, 4. If you don't get it all done, that's fine. Tack those on to the next day." Now, obviously, if you keep seeing the same thing rolling over, you need to think, okay, is this really a priority? Or is stupid jumping in here and keeping me from getting it done? But what ended up happening was Charles Schwab asked him, "Well, how much is this going to cost?" He said, "You know what? Do it for a couple of months, and then you just send me a check based on what you think it's worth." Well, Schwab was so happy that he just stroked him this absolutely huge check because his people became so much more productive. And I bring this up to say there are a lot of different things that people can do for time management, right? I've got a default calendar that is set up with, this is the time on Mondays that I do my accountability call with the group. This is my time on Fridays when I do my finance review. This is my, the time that I have blocked for coaching. And that works for some people. Other people have a harder time following a structure like that. So maybe something like Ivy Lee, where they're able to make a list of the things that they need to do and then knock them out one at a time, could be beneficial. But the bottom line is there's something out there that'll work for all of us. We just got to do the research and the digging to figure out what is it that's going to benefit us the most. Because when we do that, that's one of the big parts of helping us, I think, for lack of a better term, live the life that we really want to live.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for spending some time with us on this issue of the Business Brains and BS podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and you got some value out of it. If you did, do us a favor and do yourself a favor. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and smash that like button, that follow button. And if you're listening to us on Apple or Spotify, go ahead and follow us and leave us some comments. All right, let us know how we're doing and share what you think about the podcast with your friends, your family. The more the merrier. Until next time, we'll see you.